Oh, look. A rainy day. Normal summer is resumed. Oh, don't be like that, Neil. I know, I was just hoping for, not a rainy day today. No Barney this week. He's with the dog groomer. I am not very popular. When I left him there about, 10 minutes before I turned this recorder on to talk to you right now, he gave me that, "You can't be serious" look. Which is particularly stern. Sam says to me that she doesn't believe he has one, but he does. He does. I realise this is an episode today that won't necessarily connect with everyone's photographic interests, but bear with me. Even if you are strictly an I make and take pictures in the wilds, Neil, because I'm truly trying to escape conversation with other people type of photographer, that's fine. Although I hope you'll still find this of interest for the social aspects of the show. It occurred to me when making this special today, featuring a number of guests with wonderful stories you'll hear as we walk together, that photographing strangers is about a number of things. You need a real blend of qualities, and many of the important ones seem to have absolutely nothing to do with pressing the shutter button. And by the way, photographing strangers, I appreciate, can take many forms. That will include candids, although I've focused on the less candid in this particular program today. So from my conversations that I've had today with the guests you're about to hear, I've written some notes here, mainly one-word observation, sometimes two, and none of these qualities or requirements are in any sense in order when it comes to importance. They are notes made on scraps of paper, words what I wrote as I edited the interview's parts of the show. So, photographing strangers, as far as I can ascertain, is about human nature, human connection, aesthetics, smiling, confidence, inner confidence, to add another word on there. Definitely a form of courage, as approaching unfamiliar people can be intimidating. And if you like, flip that, because I'd like you to try and think of what you may think if somebody sidled up to you out of the blue along the high street and said, any chance I could take your picture or make your portrait? I think that can be of great assistance when you reverse engineer social moments like that. So we've got the human connection side, and then add in some more photographic facets as well. There's creative composition, there's the light to consider, the weather. If it's a really rainy day, good luck getting street portraits and people who want to stop for you. There's framing, there's layering, there's shutter speed. I mean, I'd go as far to say that street portraiture is, I think, one of the higher skilled genres of photography, or is it? Many of what I've listed as important qualities and skills are really what we have already, aren't they? We know about light. We know about composition, although it's always a work in progress with me. We've seen or we've practiced layering. We've grappled with how to conquer harsh light, blue light or no light at all. And then, in terms of the human stuff, we've negotiated the art of saying hello to a stranger, even the more introverted and shy amongst us, to varying degrees, of course, but in the main, it's something we've done many times over. We're good observers. We're good people watchers. We're genuinely interested in what's in front of our eyes. Otherwise, we wouldn't be making and taking pictures anyway, would we? What it seems to come down to is something one of my guests, Paul Hutson, says, spoiler alert, within his conversation with me. He said of one of the street portrait subjects he talks about, the following 6 words: I really enjoyed talking with him. And that seems to be, for me at any rate, the key with a small e now, the key eureka moment. My other listeners now looking at me, utterly confused. Eureka, Neil? Does that start with an E? Yes, it does. Yes. In the same way that we often talk of making a portrait, not taking a portrait, working with somebody, not just taking something from them. That's the essence of the art of conversation. I really enjoyed talking with him. Not at them, not to them, or just enough words so that you feel, well, I've passed some sort of time qualification that allows me now to say, okay, we've had a chat, can I take your picture? No, not that at all. I really enjoyed talking with him. As a people photographer, as a podcaster, as a broadcaster, and loosely in my career as an entertainer at times, you might expect me to say that I'd find talking with and then photographing people reasonably unchallenging. But not necessarily so. I'm really intrigued by and with the concept of photographing strangers. Actually, I'd like to do it more, really, because I don't find this aspect of photography personally very easy. Though when I do it, the times that I do it, and when I make lovely connections with people along the paths that I tread, to the extent that I do find the courage to say, can I take a picture of you? Can I make a portrait? It's an absolute joy. But it's not my go-to. My camera often stays by my side, and I trundle on after our conversation with my best fluffy friend Sir Barkalot and say either out loud to Barney or inwardly, oh, why didn't I make their portrait?
Today on the Photo Walk.
It's called an encounter because that's exactly what it is. You know, I can't control the light, I can't control the background to a great extent. They were just where they were when I first saw them.
The other day it came to me that I find that watching thought on other people's faces, that resting face, is a bit like watching the sky. It's like endless and like you never get tired of it.
When I'm out on the street, I never have eye contact with the person. So I'll just hide behind my camera and keep shooting until they pass me by. But then when I get back to my desk and I see that, hang on, that person was smiling at me. They didn't mind.
You're doing that dance, you know, the street photographer dance where you're just
now.
Positioning yourself, finding the best possible angle to remove distracting elements from behind the subject and so forth, finding the best possible angle.
Our studio guests today, including Valérie Jardin, Paul Hutson, Gabrielle Motola, and Mr. Whisper, all guests on this special today about photographing strangers. So, welcome along as we make our photo walks together, a show where we walk and make pictures, photographically sketchbooking our time together each week, enjoying the letters and inspirational stories you sent in alongside my special studio guests. I'll take a peek into the mailbag in a moment for a flavour of today's letters into the show, but before that, thank you to our extra milers and mpb.com who sponsor this show and keep us here week on week. MPB is the largest global platform to buy, sell and trade in used photo and video gear. They're committed to making gear more accessible and more affordable. Recirculating, here comes a big number, 570,000 cameras and lenses a year, extending the life and the creative potential of visual storytelling gear. What may seem superfluous to your requirement is a brand new piece of kit in the kit bag of another photographer, so don't let that gear sit in a cupboard, unloved, unused, and being frankly uncreative. Release it back into the world so that together we can put camera gear in more hands and keep the story going, and you'll make some cash. Put simply, MPB is the largest global platform to buy, sell and trade used photo and video kit. It's a simple, safe and circular way to trade, upgrade and get paid for your kit. I buy a lot of gear through MPB. I trust them. I trust their evaluation of kit. And I also like to sell and trade through them because I very much like the idea that I can be helping other photographers to make their stories. I'm going to suggest one website for you. Go visit mpb.com/change. So on the show today, alongside my guests, from your letters, Marilyn Davies introduces me, and by virtue you as well, to a Flickr group that's all about photographing strangers. Tony Lorenzo talks of how living with ADHD has been his superpower when it comes to photographing people on the street. And Fred Ash finds that there's really no one way to make portraits on the street. We'll also have a reminder of this month's assignment. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, check. SD cards or a spare roll of film, check. And if you have them, perhaps some calling cards to leave with a stranger in case you should meet one along the path today and would like to share a portrait that you made of them later on. Check, I think, Neil. Let's walk. The Photo Walk is a show for those who find escapism and peace away from the noise of this world, putting miles under our feet and making a picture or two to remind us of where those footprints were left. And you are a part of this, a very important part, with your pictures, your letters, your postcards and your thoughts. And this part of the path, they still haven't taken this tree away. I've walked this path with you in the last couple of weeks, and a tree came down right across the path. This is probably why it's so overgrown in the first part of the path now, because nobody's walking along here. The tree that's fallen, though, the leaves on it when it first fell were lush. It's summer after all here, but now they're all brown. The leaves have died. It's a very different picture. In fact, I'm going to make an actual picture. Just put your letters down there. It's a very different picture indeed. Right, my X100V is out with me today. My trusty travelling companion. Right, I can see the last time I used it was the other day. I was at an air show with the youngest, and it rained like mad at the end, and the shutter is really dirty. Or the glass, not the shutter, the glass, the lens is really dirty. So, there we go, I've cleaned it. Let me make a picture so I can show this tree that's come down across the path. Just a something and nothing, where I'm treading on today's photo walk. What are we going to do? F4. It's a blue sky, completely featureless. 640 ISO, 1/2/5 shutter speed, and there we go. Now all I have to do is crawl underneath the tree. Here we go. You've fallen once, you're not going to do it again, are you? Because got to get through the cobwebs. Through. Oh, look the other side. Now there's a bit of light hitting the branches on the other side. This is an even better picture, actually. As a sketchbook, let me just get this. Here we go. This time, F4, 320 ISO, there's more light now. I'm even going to underexpose by just a stop, 1/2/5, and there we go. All right, never mind my sketchbook images today. There are some fantastic photographs to go with the subject that we're talking about today, photographing strangers, from the guests that feature the pictures. The pictures Paul talks about in particular in his part of the conversation with me about photographing strangers. Those portraits in particular that he talks about will be on the show page. We've 4 guests today, but I still want to feature some of your letters that you sent in, specifically on the subject of street portraits and making photographs of strangers. And I'm starting with Marilyn Davies from Australia. Hi, Neil. This upcoming episode will be of great interest to me. I love street photography and prefer candid shots. But as a way of getting out of my comfort zone, I joined a group on Flickr called 100 Strangers. There are some outstanding photographs in the group and some very talented photographers. Someone who'd commented on my photography suggested I join the group, and it's been a wonderful experience encountering people, finding out a little bit about them and making their portrait. Well, it's all about encounters, isn't it, today? And just to fill in some of the gaps, because I went to have a look at the group, Marilyn, what a massive success that group's been. Started 2007. There are, as of writing these notes anyway, nearly 48,000 pictures and 15,500 members. And as they say on the introduction to the group, the 100 Strangers ethos is learning by doing. It's not a race to collect 100 pictures, and I like that idea. It's all about taking your time and learning. So I'll leave a link on the show page. Do follow it. Look at Marilyn's work, of course, within the group, and also look around the group. There's some fantastic stuff. Anyway, as Marilyn says, the thing I like about stranger portraits is that you meet people and have a chat. It makes the world so much more pleasant. I've posted 69 photos of strangers so far. When you get to that point, it starts to dissolve your initial fear. I came across the brilliant photography of Gabrielle Motola. It may have been through one of your episodes, but found her approach refreshing and inspiring. After listening to her being interviewed, I made a commitment to explore this genre with a little more commitment. And, as you know, she's on the show today. So Gabrielle will talk about, she talks about the more philosophical, psychological as well aspects of making portraits of strangers. I'm going on holiday to Europe soon, says Marilyn, and planning to do some street photography. Definitely wherever I find myself, but particularly in Amsterdam and Oslo and Copenhagen. You are doing a tour. I've had some business cards printed so I can ensure those people I speak to can access their images. And in the meantime, here's a link to some of my street portraits, which Marilyn and I will link to on the show page as promised. And now I'm looking forward to, gauntlet firmly thrown down, those European pictures. That's not even a sort of nudge, hint. That's a straight up, please send them in request. So thank you, Marilyn, for the opening letter in today's special. It's a show featuring 4 friends, friends of the show too. Actually, Gabrielle Motola, who I've spoken with before about making pictures on the street, although this is a new conversation that takes, as I suggested, a more psychological journey. Valérie Jardin, who will be talking about a more candid approach to photographing strangers that leads to an encounter. Mr. Whisper, who needed to change the way he worked to produce street portraits for a particular client project. And Paul Hutson, who I'll introduce in a moment. All those I've spoken to about this subject, this genre, have a great deal of experience in making pictures of strangers. So I think they're perfect for this end-of-month special. And as I said right at the start of today's show, even if this is not your chosen genre, I think there's some takeaways. There's always takeaways from listening to those with great experience talk about photography, because much of what's said can apply to so many other forms of photography, regardless of whether there's a stranger in the picture or not. So, Paul Hutson, I introduced him last week to you on the show, but if you're listening out of sync, Paul Hutson came to the Isle of Wight. That's where I first met Paul. He came on one of the very first photo walk retreat, and then he came back to Scotland a year later as well. It was a great deal of pleasure spending time with Paul, because he's fascinating to watch. I absolutely adore watching him at work, because the way that he engages with people is just top drawer, as they say. It really is. It's just fabulous watching him work and engaging with other people. He's such a natural at it. I've split my chat with Paul into 2 parts, within which we'll hear stories of those he's photographed, and also his ethos about conversation. Conversation that leads to photographing strangers. Now, the very first part, until about 5 minutes or so in, if you're an extra miler, you will have heard. But I think it introduces the topic so well, I do need to play this part again. And Paul, as you will hear, has very much inspired the title of today's show. Here's part 1 of my chat with Paul Hutson. Paul, encounters. I feel like I'm almost sort of, I've nipped in and whipped it for something I want to do with a podcast. So,
no problem.
But I do like the word encounters. And I want to know why you've used it and why it's become attached to this project.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Neil, I mean, I usually have quite a few projects on the go at any one time. As you know, yeah. I treat photography as a kind of way of expressing life experience, the moment and the history that we live through. And the projects that I have going, whatever I tend to photograph as the days go by, get grouped into one of, I think I've got about 9 on the go at the moment. And the predominant project, as you're very familiar with, is my portraits. And I do quite a bit of that. But also, when I'm walking out and about and doing my own photo walks, what I really love is I really enjoy meeting people, talking to them, hearing about their life experience, and then relating that to my own. And sometimes it can be 2 or 3 minutes, and then I make a photograph. Sometimes it could be an hour, and then I make a photograph. But basically, I was trying to think, well, what dictates how I meet these people? And really, it's serendipity, and it's just a chance encounter. And on that basis, I called the project Encounters.
Which I love. And I've seen this as, I've seen you in action, as it were, when it comes to your encounters with people. I don't know whether you remember her name, but there was a wonderful lady we met in Cromarty. That was it. In fact, there were a few people you met you were taking photographs of. Do you remember that particular encounter we had with that?
Yes, I do.
I have the good fortune here of seeing the pictures in front of me. Well, I will be sharing these on the show page, by the way, so every picture we talk about you will see. But I'm seeing the pictures before me change immediately because Paul is calling up, as it were, this person that I'm talking about that we met in Cromarty when we were in Scotland on the Scottish retreat.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in the autumn.
There she is. Did I write her name? DJ Claire.
DJ Claire, that was it. And right, okay, here's the pictures. The pictures just come flashing up in front of me. Immediately, I wonder whether the fact that DJ Claire was wearing a yellow top across the bay, you could see these huge they were the yellow pylons that go around the offshore wind farms. And there's a splash of yellow in 2 places. And I wonder if that was catching your eye as well. It certainly caught my eyes. We were making the pictures.
It was. That's what initially caught my eye, and I moved into that position to take that frame you can see. And then, of course, she took over because she was such a vivacious woman.
She was, yeah.
And we had a fabulous conversation with her, didn't we? And I took a few more subsequent to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're very, very natural with the way that you're able to talk with people. It's not a skill that everybody has. And this is probably a good time to bring in the first of the encounter pictures. I love this. This portrait was made a little while before the general election in the UK. And the subject of your photograph here, the encounter, the conversation you had, was with the politician who is now the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And it is...
Angela Rayner.
Yes.
I kind of had a lead into this.
Yeah.
I was with Anna McCarthy.
Right.
In Westminster Square. Mm-hmm. And we turned around and suddenly saw Angela Rayner stood there with her bodyguard at a further distance back. Mm. And Anna being Anna, she started the conversation and just said, hello, what you up to? And to my surprise, instead of Angela Rayner saying, I can't talk now, I'm on business or whatever, she was very open, started talking with Anna. It was in between the Queen dying and the Queen's funeral. Right. And we were stood in Westminster Square. She saw Angela, began talking to her. And I thought she would just say to Anna, no, sorry, I haven't got time to talk. But she started talking about the end of an era with the Queen dying and what would happen next and what would happen to the royal family, and seemed quite concerned. And all of a sudden, I was taken from the media picture that I've been fed of this kind of argumentative woman who's the deputy leader of the Labour Party, who was fierce and had staunch...
Yes, she does come across as very fierce. Doesn't take prisoners. That's the media.
She's not at all like that. Really nice person to talk to. Very engaging. And so we only talked for perhaps 5 minutes before I said to her, look, again, I had a camera around my neck. Can I make a portrait of you? And I thought she would say, no, I'm sorry. Or the minder behind would sort of wave and wag his finger and say, no, sorry, sir, no publicity. And I just took that picture. And again, it's not stunning, but it's certainly a record for me of my encounter and my changed views.
Knowing that you're a signed-up member of the Monster Raving Loony Party, has it changed your political persuasion?
I think it shows actually that a lot of politicians, despite what you hear and read, are genuine people that work really hard, that try to serve the country and do good. and might be right or left of centre, whatever. But if they're sensible people, and she seemed to be one.
Do you know what, Paul? That was a perfect political answer. You didn't answer my question at all. Well trained. Now, I should just fill in the gap. Anna McCarthy, for my other listener who doesn't know, is also an extra miler and a great supporter of the show. And the two of you are and I've watched you both work actually as photographers, are exceptionally good at engaging with people, talking, and then making photographs. That's a terrific portrait of a very powerful woman in a very, very human, I'm going to say capture. I'm never that keen on the word capture, but a very human capture. It really is. It's fantastic. Really nice.
Thank you, sir.
Wonderful eye contact. Everything about that photograph is a super, super portrait. Right, next one.
And this is a pretty straightforward one. I'm walking down the street in York, and I saw this young lady that, as you can see from the photograph, looks absolutely amazing. She's a goth with a leather jacket on, incredible eye makeup, and got fangs painted on her lips.
Yes, I saw that.
And I followed her down the road. Bit risky. People on the opposite side of the pavement must have wondered what I was doing, but I just about to speak to her at traffic lights that she stopped for to cross a crossroads, and the traffic lights changed and she continued. So I had to follow for about another 50 yards to the next set of traffic lights. And then I said, "Oh, excuse me, God, I really like the way you look," which is true. And then I explained who I was, and I thought, she might issue a swear word and tell me where to go. But then once I'd asked, and she said, "Oh, yeah, that'd be good." She was more than willing to walk back with me another 25 yards to a part of the wall of York, near where you and I walked.
Oh, so you actually asked her to go and make the photograph somewhere else. This is not just
the light wasn't right where we were stood. Right. It was noisy, there was traffic. So she actually followed me back. And of course, while we were walking, I was able to ask more about her, and she was telling me about the music she's interested in and the fact that her dad was a goth as well.
Wow.
So we had a good conversation, and she recommended 2 or 3 bands to me, and then it was over in 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and off she went. But I was pleased with the resultant photograph.
So this is a shorter encounter, but it's an encounter where you did something that I don't see you do very often when I've watched you work anyway, which is you follow somebody. And I'm doing my best here not to make it sound a bit creepy, but street portrait photographers have been doing that for a long, long time, so it wouldn't be anything new. But you don't usually do that.
I don't. It was kind of necessary because she was walking. She was walking reasonably quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I do different techniques. If I'm on the opposite side of the street and I see somebody, I will leg it as inconspicuously as I can on the opposite side of the road to get in front of them, and then cross the road and then walk forward so that I actually meet them face to face. I've tried that before. It works sometimes it doesn't. Or, this is the hunting, as Sean Tucker would describe, method. No, it's not. Is it? Yes, it is the hunting method, as opposed to the fishing method, where you actually stand in one place where the light's right and you hope to meet characters there. So she was very much on the move, but I couldn't cross the road. The circumstances were that if I wanted to make a photograph of her, I had to follow her until the time was right to approach her without seeming threatening, So there was a lot of people stood at the lights waiting for the green man to cross. So to then introduce myself and ask if she would mind being photographed, there was lots of other people around. It seemed a good place to do it, it was.
In a shorter encounter, of which this is one, those opening words, that opening gambit, if I can use that word, have to be a bit of a sharpened experience, don't they? Because it's not like stopping and talking to somebody for half an hour who sat there with a sandwich and a mug of tea. This now has a different energy to it entirely.
Yeah. To say, I kicked off, as I say, by saying I really liked the way she looked, and I tried to make that sound as genuine as possible, without any sarcasm, and it was true. I was speaking the truth, which always helps, and also I think there's a thing about the encounters that I have, and when I make a portrait of somebody in an encounter, I am respecting them. To use Turnley's language, I'm honouring them. I'm not taking the mickey or in any way trying to ridicule them, and hopefully that comes across in my demeanour and in my language. So you won't see in this entire collection of encounters any photograph that's really taking the mickey out of anybody. I just don't do that. So I think they soon latch on to the fact that I'm being genuine. I still get rejections, of course, and I expected one from her.
And how do you deal with those when they come?
I just say, oh, that's fine. I quite understand. Absolutely no problem. Have a nice day, or something along those lines.
And how does that make you feel for the next portrait or the one after? I know some people. I was talking to Tim Clinch about this, and a guest, and he said, well, it's okay. There's more people that will come along. I mean, for him, it was very much water off a proverbial, but rejection is hard.
It is, and I think in the beginning I did take it more personally, but as time's gone by, because I've been doing this a long time, I just take it on the chin now and think, right, I think for a few minutes maybe, did I approach that wrong? Was I too rushing it, too forceful, or was my stance, my posture, my expression wrong? But then it goes, and I move on to the next potential photograph.
Now, this next one, he looks like a classic farmer. He's got proper farming hands, is what my dad would have said. He was a farmer just for a short while. Proper farming hands, lad. That's what he's got. And I want you to talk about this picture, but when you talk to these people, because you have stories about them, you remember them, is it that your memory is just so razor sharp that you remember everything they've said to you? Or do you take notes, or do you record audio? How do you do that part of these encounters?
That's a good question. I don't, at the time, I don't take notes. I just completely focus on the photography and the conversation. Afterwards, I speak into my iPhone and do a voice message. And quickly get down the basics of what they've said, their name, where I am, and that kind of thing. Then I type that up later as part of, I have something I call loosely a catalogue, where I list the prints in a particular project, and I put notes with the prints in case I should do a book or an exhibition or something along those lines. Yeah.
Tell us about this chap then.
So this was a Sunday afternoon. My wife and two friends, another couple, we were out for a country walk, and I'd just taken along my little autofocusing camera in case I wanted to make the odd snap here and there. And as part of the walk, we walked through a farmyard. There was no one there, but there was all these cows leaning through the metal railings and feeding off the hay. And I thought, they're nice colour. I'll just make a quick snap of those. And as I was doing it, he came out. My first reaction was, maybe I always have this reaction to farmers, was he was going to shout at me and say, "What are you doing on my land? Get off my land."
Oh dear.
But actually, it was exact opposite. He said, "Oh, you're interested in cows, and do you know what these are?" I nearly said what make they are. Shows you how much I know about farming. And we then had a lovely conversation, which involved how long he and his family had been tenant farmers. They didn't own the farm, tenant farmers on that land, the problems they'd gone through, what had happened since we came out of the EU, and all the problems with subsidies and the money the government had promised him, which hadn't turned up yet, and kind of the profit on milk and beef and so forth. And the couple that we were with, I think, were getting a bit bored and starting to wander off on the walk. And my wife was nudging me to say, "Yeah, well, that's great, but come on, Paul, we need to get back with our friends." But he was such an engaging guy. I really enjoyed the chat I had with him, and he was more than willing for me to make this portrait.
The interesting thing that's coming through loud and clear with all of these portraits or these encounters is that actually people are more willing and probably quite flattered that somebody should be interested so much in another human being, because that doesn't happen all the time. And we live in a world where people pass each other by on the street and don't necessarily show interest in each other. But perhaps I'm sort of muted, right? But above and beyond that, not too much.
Absolutely. Neil, I think you're right. And a lot of people, particularly on holiday, will get their camera out and photograph scenes and that with people in it, but with no interaction at all with the people, don't know who they are, really don't know their names. And sometimes from a photographic aesthetic point of view, those photographs look good. But particularly with this kind of work, this type of project, I much prefer to have that engagement and hope that it comes through in the photograph.
And Paul Hutson is back shortly for part 2 of my conversation with him. Photographs that he talks about today, the portraits he talks about, will be featured on the show page. Do go to it because there's many links and pictures from those who feature on the show today, including letter writers. There's no poetry from the path for the next couple of weeks. We've got these, 2 summer specials. This week, Photographing Strangers, and next week, I'm in the darkroom with a friend of the show, a specialist printer who spent his life devoted to the craft of it. I go to visit him in his darkroom in London and discover some of the names he's been printing for, including Martin Parr and the late Elliot Erwitt. So a very special episode next week. You're welcome to walk along with the show. That is, after all, what the photo walk's all about. But I won't be doing a lot of walking next week. No, I shall be sitting and listening a lot. So that's next week's special, in the dark room. So there's no poetry from the path. Remember last week I mentioned it was a sort of fleeting mention, but I feel you've taken it to heart because a few have come in. I suggested that perhaps the poetry for the path, or from the path, is it for or from? I don't know. It's one of those fluid feature titles that it perhaps wasn't the most engaging feature in terms of, well, it might be nice to listen to, but it's certainly one that people find difficult, I think, in terms of writing it, and it's all about you writing it in. And then, I wouldn't say a flurry, but I'd certainly say enough to convince me that we'll keep poetry for a little while longer. A few came in, so thank you very much for those. They'll be featuring again very, very soon. There's also no shutter sync either this week or next during the specials, although do go to the show page today and you'll find the pictures you made from last week's show when we said 3, 2, 1, click. Right, a letter from Tony Lorenzo, one of our wonderful friends, and not far from me either. He lives in Oxfordville. You remember Tony from the last episode of 2023, who in the early part of this century found 2 fading 1930s photographs in a box on the floor of a shop in London featuring a girl called June. We told the story. It was a wonderful story. It was completely the right episode to round off the year with. We told the story of a quest to find who June was in real life, and also pictures of people that were with June found in subsequent photographs that all linked up together. It was a photographic detective story that took Tony up and down the UK piecing together June's lost family album. I'll leave a link to that episode on the show page just in case you haven't heard it. But in the meantime, and in keeping with the theme of this show today, here's a letter from Tony on photographing strangers. Hola, says Tony. How are you? I'm very well, Tony. When I was listening to the episode 440, when you asked for people to comment about making pictures of strangers, it literally came to mind the exciting stuff I'm doing this Saturday. Now, I'm usually a bit of a lone wolf when I'm taking pictures. It's a kind of ceremony for me. This weekend, I'm breaking that rule and joining a photo walk. Exciting and scary, all at the same time. This new exercise reminds me of how I started taking portraits of strangers. When I was studying photography, I always felt more relaxed when walking around with other photographers, asking random people on the street for portraits. But now I'm more of this lone photographer, as I feel more comfortable being alone and talking, more relaxed certainly with people. I have 3 golden rules for street portraits, which are: number 1, find the spot. Find a place where you feel comfortable and like the light. To avoid getting messy with measuring the light, I always find the brightest spot and measure the light once I'm there. Once I find the right person, things will be much easier and it won't take long to make a picture. Number 2, be clear about your intentions. One of the things ADHD has helped me with is not being able to lie. I always approach the person I want to photograph, explain who I am, normally starting with, I'm Mr. No One and I take pictures. Oh, Tony, I'm not sure you should use that line. You're a Mr. Everybody, and we know that from the story you told before Christmas. And then I give details about my intentions. If you have a card, says Tony, it can help people feel more comfortable with the picture's use. The card needs to show them social media and how to find you as well. I think this card is not everybody uses one. And I think Gabrielle, in her conversation, he says, wincing as I'm trying to remember, yes, I'm sure she doesn't carry cards now. But they are useful. They are a very useful tool indeed. Number 3, he says, relax. I always use tiny cameras. I'm more comfortable and quicker with my Canon G9X. And if I'm using film, I use my Olympus MJU. In my opinion, cameras can be a bit scary at times. Big cameras are always intimidating for a random person being approached for a picture. I think number 3 could have been go small. Relax is good though. I'll take relax. I could keep going on about my methods, says Tony, but these rules are my main ones, those 3. I love hearing about the photo walks these days. The weather sometimes, just sometimes, in brackets, helps too. Many of the portraits I take are on my website. I'm working hard on this these days, and you can check my work here. Well, I tell you what, I'll leave the link to TonyLorenzoPhoto.com on the show page today. Wish me luck for Saturday. Greetings from Oxfordville, Tony Lorenzo. Well, by now, because you wrote that letter a couple of weeks ago, by now you will have made that walk. So I'm intrigued to see the pictures. Come on, Tony. Let's share those on the show page in the weeks to come, shall we? Right, my next guest. I don't think I would have done this show today had I not been able to book a little of her time, because I think as someone who talks and teaches making portraits of strangers, Gabrielle was definitely on my must-have list of guests. Actually, they're all must-haves, aren't they? Of course they are. Gabrielle Motola is a photographer, a writer, an educator with a background in psychology, photography and film. Born in the States, she moved to the UK in 2001. Her early career was shaped by apprenticeships with top photographers like Annie Leibovitz, that's not a bad name, like Annie Leibovitz, yes, specializing in C-type printing, video editing and coloring. I feel very, very, very fortunate to have spent time photographing with Gabrielle under her guidance when it comes to street portraits. And I have a feeling, although I haven't broken this to Gabrielle yet, that she'll be perfect for our edition on confidence and imposter syndrome that's coming up in the next couple of months. So here's Gabrielle Motola on this special about making portraits of strangers. Gabrielle, your interest in making portraits on the street, I've followed you for a long time. We've talked on the podcast about this a good few times. But I want to revisit some aspects of making, well, I'm going to call it making photographs of strangers, because that's what essentially this is, whether it's urban photography, street photography, photography in a small village square, some place in downtown, very normal England. It's all the same. You're photographing strangers. What developed your interest in it? What brought you to it in terms of photography? Because you're eclectic.
Oh, yeah. I'd like to say diverse, maybe.
Diverse.
Yes, absolutely. I think just my innate curiosity towards people and myself, my mind, the way it works. And I think a lot of us are drawn to people. And I love watching, people watching. I think a lot of us do. The other day it came to me that I find that watching thought on other people's faces, that resting face, is a bit like watching the sky. It's like endless and like you never get tired of it. It's like just watching the clouds passing. But I wasn't able to do it when I wanted to. I felt very held back and limited by my fear of doing it. and my fear of what people would think of me doing it and what might happen. I think the story I was telling myself often was that something bad was going to happen if I asked. So I didn't do it. And I used to find myself seeing people all the time that I would just absolutely love to photograph, and not being able to was sort of slowly chipping away at a part of my confidence. And it was a bit frustrating. So I one day decided, after actually meeting a photographer named John Manel, who's called Portrait Per Day on Instagram.
Yeah, we know him.
Yeah, John's great. We met at an Olympus exhibition and decided to go out for a meal. And I gave him a copy of my book, and we talked about portraiture, and we talked about, because my book, An Equal Difference, is I was arranging to meet with people. Yeah. So I had a purpose. Yeah. But a lot of the time I was talking to the people I was photographing, so I was kind of interviewing them. I realized I was interviewing them after the first round. So I was in a different stage with my portraiture, but I was still not able to do this kind of at will, on command, regardless of the day I was having. I had to be in a particular mood to be able to do it. And, he told me about the fact that he just committed to doing it every day as a way to get him out of the house during a period of depression while he was in school. It was his partner's suggestion. And he found that it lifted him out of this depression that he was in. And I'm certainly, as we've talked about before, no stranger to those kinds of mood states. So I decided that night, from that next day on, to commit to a year of making portraits. I would ask one person every day. I wouldn't force myself. It wouldn't have to result in a portrait. So if they said no, I'd done my job for the day as long as I'd asked. I remember the first one was Shepherd's Bush Market tube station on the platform. I can tell because that's the brilliance of digital. I can go back and I have the date. And also when I photograph, like a lot of people, it's part of my memory. It's part of the way I remember things. And it was hard at first, but over time, this was like 2019 or 18, I think. And I found over time, not only did my approach change, but my confidence changed. I found every time if I did it every day, and there were days I really didn't want to do it, but I'd made a commitment, I started getting not only better at it, but I started observing things about myself in relationship to strangers and how I thought about them, these stories I was telling myself, and how I could change those. Because they weren't really they weren't reality. They were just in my head. And I was creating reality for myself by what I thought. So it became, because my background's in psychology, it became a way of learning to emotionally regulate, because you're going to get an adrenaline rush, especially if somebody rejects you and you're rejection sensitive like I am. And a lot of people are. Some people aren't. I've met a few photographers actually who just know that rejection's not about them. They sort of have just been either born that way or raised that way.
Well, I didn't have you down as rejection sensitive, I must say, because I've had the good fortune to be able to watch you work, and I've been on one of your classes. When we talk about rejection, there's something I keep referring back to often in the podcast. Certainly when I talk to people about street portraiture, I say, I was on Gabrielle's class, and I explain this story of how I saw somebody. You're talking about seeing somebody that you think, I've got to photograph you. It was a man in a stripy jumper, and I think he had a beret on as well. And I just thought, I need a photograph of you. I want a photograph of you. I want to talk to you. And I remember approaching him, and I can't remember what I said. I can't remember what my opening gambit, if you want to use that word, was. But he point blank refused me. He said, I don't think so, not today. And he moved on down the road. And another one of our class also stops him and asked him, and then proceeded to spend 20 minutes with him, talking with him, obviously having a great conversation, and I made some super portraits. And I thought, well, what's the difference between me and him? And why did I get such rejection? And you can see I've carried this around with me. And it was an interesting, can I call it psychological experience?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess you don't experience me as that now when I taught that class, because I've worked on it so much.
Well, you were so natural. You just had this ability to engage with somebody as if it didn't seem like you were engaging. In terms of there was no sort of purposeful, I must just stop you. There was this sort of natural dovetail, like jigsawing flow of being able to talk with somebody. Engage, I always think of as quite a sharp word. When you engage with something, there's a very conscious engagement going on, something that you do. It's a bit like when you drive. There's a conscious, what's it called? When you first learn to drive, everything's very conscious, isn't it? Look in your mirror, look in that mirror, everything's very, but after a while you become unconscious competence, that's it, unconscious competence. So it's not so much engagement where you feel you're forcing something, you're actually naturally doing something. And there's a few people that I know personally that do it so well, and you're one of them. Thank you.
Well, I think this is the brilliant part. This is why I love teaching, because if I can change, other people can. And I think what you're definitely, I love that. What did you call it? The unconscious
competence.
Yeah, I think what happens is you integrate the process into your being, and it becomes natural through habit, through doing it often, which is why I think it was so monumental. And I had it wasn't easy always, but I had such a great experience with making it a habit over a long period of time. I mean, you don't have to do a year, but a year is a good cycle. It's a bit like, the car analogy is great. I often use that. You sort of learn where all the controls are, but it's a bit awkward because you have to think through everything. Yes. And I think that when you're photographing, thought can get in the way. You have such a narrow window. And if you're in your head thinking, you're not really present experiencing. It's a bit like we're talking now, and I'm really trying to listen to you instead of thinking of the next thing I have to say, but I have to juggle the two things. And I will forget things, of course, but I have to let go of that. And I think the flow that you mentioned is just you watching me not limit myself, you watching me not get into my head, but simply, I want to photograph this person, I'm going to ask. And I think that comes from a number of things. Practice, yes, but also being really clear in my intentions and my ethics about what I'm doing, so I'm not up in my head thinking about that while it's about to happen. And the part about the rejection, and the reason I think the reason I carry it around, and I think this is applicable to you perhaps and others, is that we take it personally. We think that it is about us. There's something about me that person said no to. Yep. And they said yes to this other person because they're better somehow. But where in actuality, that person that you asked might have had an experience with someone who looked very much like you that was triggered when you asked, and they backed away. You have no idea. And we'll often tell ourselves a story that I wasn't good enough, or I did something wrong, or I said something wrong. And, whilst you can influence people, depending on how you feel when you approach them, you ultimately can't control it. And so I suppose over time, I learned to tell myself a different story, and I learned to get out of my head. I figure if I'm telling myself a story, I'm going to try and tell myself a positive one instead of making myself miserable by telling myself a story about how that person rejected me because I'm inferior in some way or incompetent. And so it's freeing. And I think the unconscious competence that comes with that is that you no longer stay in your head. You get out of your head and you get into the world, and you get into listening. And you listen not only to the person, but you listen to yourself. You listen to the conversation going on in your head. And you learn to change that. And that, for me, is what starts to erode that hesitation and starts to move more towards a flow rather than a rigid agenda. And I think some of that agenda is fear. It comes from fear of what might happen, what they might say, what they might think of you. And so we start to, as humans, I think, try to figure out a way to manipulate that or avoid that or control that in some way. And that is it's a congestion. You're doing that.
It's leading actually to a question about social conditioning, because I definitely feel uncomfortable approaching certain types of people, certain demographics. And maybe that's because I'm a man. Maybe that's because I'm a 50-something-year-old man that I think, well, I can't approach you. I shouldn't approach you. Maybe I'll make you feel uncomfortable. For example, when I'm recording the podcast, I do sometimes stop people to make conversation. And if a photograph happens, a photograph happens. More often than not, it doesn't, even though I'm out making a photography podcast. More often or not, I'm delighted to stop and talk to somebody without feeling that I have to say, well, I'm making a photography podcast, so could I make a picture of you? In terms of being able to approach people, I'm always very cautious when I'm walking along, for example, a quiet place like a towpath. If there's somebody coming towards me that I think I may make them feel a bit awkward because I'm talking into a microphone and looking a bit weird, I stop doing it. And I think the same thing with street portraits. I'm a little bit nervous of approaching certain people because I'm feeling I don't want to make you feel awkward. Or am I overthinking this?
Well, I think you're carrying around our society's unconscious bias towards how you were. I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, but it's a shame that, it's like that hashtag not all men. It's a shame that you feel you have to carry that burden, because that isn't how you behave. Those are not your intentions, but it just so happens that you're part of a demographic which has to do with social conditioning. And therefore you take on that projection in your mind of who you are, or who you might be perceived as, more to the point. And that exists in parallel with who you actually are. And I think this process is about moving towards who you are, not who you're afraid people think you are. And that is a lot to do with intention and clarifying those. And I mean, I know I certainly do judge people on the street differently. It's late at night. If there's a man walking behind me late at night, I'm on high alert, more so than I would be if a woman was walking behind me. I mean, our instinct to survive is huge. And so it's really deeply rooted in all of this. And I don't want to fall into a rabbit hole. I know we have a limited amount of time to talk, but like I said, there's a lot to unpack there. But what I try to teach people is to really get into the core of what they actually think and feel, and to try and become aware of their unconscious bias. So a lot of what we think or project onto a situation is reflective of what we think, even though we try to justify it away. But try maybe as an experiment the next time you feel that, to remind yourself that that's a story in your head, and that you're still just a being. You're in a massive energy. And sure, we do look at people and judge them, but we feel people a lot more than we see people, but we're not necessarily conscious of that. Our instincts kick in far before, like way before we really see somebody. You can feel somebody approaching before you get a really good visual of them.
I suppose the next stage is moving to that. Well, what do I say to them? How do I stop them? What is it? Is it me saying I like your hat? Is it me saying what a beautiful day, like your dog?
Well,
there is no silver bullet. There's no here's an ABC on how you stop somebody to make a photograph.
There's no control. There's no control.
There's
no control.
Which is the frightening bit, but also the so very much amazing moment when it all sort of clicks in and a conversation starts and you have this interaction with a fellow human and they say, do you know what? Yeah, I don't mind having my photograph made.
Yeah, and that's very rewarding to connect to somebody. But we're brutal on ourselves when we create like these. I think it was, I was listening to Tilda Swinton talk the other night, and she was talking about how humans are so funny. She's very diplomatic in that way that so many British people are, and so many Americans are not. But she was saying it's so funny how, I hope I'm paraphrasing, but so funny how human beings, and it's so funny, they make all these like problems for themselves. And we really do, like we go into these situations like you're describing and we're attached. Like, how can I manipulate this situation to my advantage? And maybe that's not what you're thinking verbatim, but that is the subtext of what you're thinking. Like, how can I get a win? How can I make this go my way? Yeah. And I think that's the first pitfall, is that you are in that mindset of how can I make this person do what I want, which is to say yes. Right then and there, I mean, we are so on an unconscious level conscious of those types of interactions. Like, I think I used the example in the workshop of like, have you ever been walking on the street and somebody stops you and says, how's your day going? And you're like, oh, what's coming next? What are you selling? Yeah. We all, you're like, no. Yes. And I think it's kind of like practicing non-attachment to the outcome of the situation, because either way you're going to have an interaction with that person, and that's going to be a valuable thing. Yeah. You get a chance to test out your humanity and theirs every time you ask. So if they say no, there'll be another person that'll come along that you'll photograph. And I'm sure that day after the stripy man there was. And what do you say? It's a bit like us talking. Like, how do you know what you're going to say next? And I know that you're really good at what you do. And I think that's because you really listen to people when they speak. And so what you're going to say next just naturally comes, doesn't it?
And I suppose that happens for us all if we
let go.
Yeah, let go. Do you know what I might call this episode?
What?
Revenge of the Stripy Man.
I think that puts all the power in the stripy man's hand, though. I think all the power's in your hands.
Oh, I quite like the idea of the stripy man.
Well, it's your show.
I absolutely adore Gabrielle Motola's work. There's such a sort of vast arena of different genres that Gabrielle works within. Her storytelling is beautiful, it really is, and I'll leave pictures on the show page and of course links to her work and her book. on the show page today. Breaking with tradition slightly, I'd like to mention the extra mile early on in the show today, as it has bearing on what we're doing here. I went to a country fair, stroke steam rally, invited by a good friend of the show, Harriet Langridge. The steam rally is in celebration of traction engines, vintage cars, and people who revel in being covered in engine grease. Well, sort of, because the steam rally also featured a special electric bus. I'm not quite sure. I looked at those that were driving traction engines, etc. I looked at them looking at the electric bus. They had a quizzical look upon their faces. And also there was a temporary township of cowboys. Where that fits in with steam rallies, not quite sure, but it doesn't matter. That's the eccentricity of a good old English country fair stroke steam rally. The Extra Mile is part of our private Patreon channel, supported by our wonderful community we call Extra Milers. Each week there's an extra show which often features our community as stars of that show, and today is one such programme. Although to match the show about photographing strangers that we're doing here, I thought alongside Harriet, well, she could show me around the steam rally because she helps organise it. I'd see if I could make some portraits of strangers. And I soon found out that when you have people who absolutely love their hobbies, it's a prime place to get confident in asking for a portrait.
On this week's Extra Mile.
This is a day of firsts today. We're on a traction engine. Mike is in charge. And I'm steering. So frankly, anything could happen. How many tons is this traction engine?
12 and a half.
There we go. Just tip your head slightly to the side that way. That's it. And a picture of Jeremiah, register. And I'd like 160 acres, please, if I could.
Certainly.
Yeah. By lunchtime.
Nice little story, she goes. My dad was the local poacher and he was also the local gamekeeper.
Right.
But the local policeman would never wake the baby to check to see what was in the bottom of the pram, which is how Mum delivered all said pheasants. So I just love that kind of history from the prams, and it's something we get when we come out to these shows.
When the roads were just sort of dust covered, the wheels could skip round a little bit. This can't, and it really struggles to just turn a corner.
We'd just use your power steering, surely.
Well, absolutely.
I did notice something on the side, Ben, which I love.
Oh, yeah, the horn.
Yeah. There we go. Every car should have these still, shouldn't they? So join me on the Extra Mile today. And if you'd like to join our community, then if you look at the website, photowalk.show, top right-hand corner, you'll see a yellowy orangey yellow button that says support the show. Click that. It takes you through to a page that explains all about the Extra Mile. And from there you can join us. Right, a guest from a couple of weeks ago now who recorded some extra thoughts for this special about photographing strangers. Mr. Whisper is an incredible street photographer based in London. And a few weeks ago we talked about his work doing, well, just that. Most of it, work that's done when the sun goes down. Just delicious, beautiful pictures of vibrancy and energy around the city. Commercial companies also commission him to make work in his style, although this company that he talks about now, they asked him to step out of his more candid mode to make invited portraits on the street. And I thought you might like to hear how he tackles the process. This is a short conversation with Mr. Whisper. A couple of weeks ago, Bal, aka Mr. Whisper, we talked just very briefly about street portraiture. We didn't really touch on it. We talked mainly about your candid work. But this being a special about urban portraiture, street portraiture, finding the confidence to go up to people and make portraits. And I know it's something you want to do more of, because that was something you talked about within the show. And I've picked out one particular campaign photography project, which was In Post. You were invited to launch the In Post UK Instagram channel. Tell me about that, first of all. It was inspired by Humans of New York, which is an iconic thing in itself. It's sort of given birth to Humans of Barcelona, Humans of Madrid, There's lots of humans going on around the world, but tell me about the project as a whole before we get into how you shot it.
Yeah, for sure. So when InPost first approached me, I think the thing that caught my eye, I mean, I was like, hang on, how am I going to work with a brand that does lockers? You know, okay, I use them to return my Amazon packaging, but what's this all about? Yeah. But the fact that they put Humans of New York in the brief, that's what really attracted me to it.
Right.
A lot of my 99% of my street photography, I've never interacted with the people that I'm shooting. I have no idea what their story is. And I remember whenever I get back to my desk and I'm looking at stuff in post-production, and, I'd never, when I'm out on the street, I never have eye contact with the person. So I'll just hide behind my camera and keep shooting until they pass me by. But then when I get back to my desk and I see that, hang on, that person was smiling at me. They didn't mind, maybe we could have had a good conversation after that photo and, made some more photos. I thought this would be a really good challenge for me to take on this project because they wanted to put me in different locations around London, standing there for the whole day. So with an interviewer to find out what their story was. But my role was essentially to take their portrait.
Did you, in that respect, then, you had somebody that was writing their story, but you still had to approach them. That was your job, wasn't it?
Yes. That was my...
And how did that feel? Coming out of where you say you're shooting, 99% of what you're shooting is candid, and you don't have an interaction. Now the interaction is absolutely full on.
I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, for me, I don't have a problem approaching people. I'm quite happy to do that. There's no bad intentions. It's, there's something that's going to come out of it for both of us. So for me, approaching people wasn't an issue. Yeah. I think some of the times I felt a little bit bad. I think there might be, when people go to these particular lockers, they're not dressed for the occasion. They might be out in their pajamas, quickly trying to capture the lockers while they're empty. So I thought that might be a bit of a hindrance. But I was really surprised that over 90% of people said yes, and they were really up for me taking their photo.
Not many of them are actually holding their parcels. A lot of them, it feels like they could just be people you've met on the street.
Yeah, and that was on purpose as well. We didn't want it to be kind of over-branded in any way. We didn't even have to have the lockers in the photos either. It was really about the people and their stories and how they interacted with the brand.
How did you approach them then? What would... I'm always looking for an opening gambit, like there's some sort of silver bullet. And I know it doesn't exist. I know every single person's different. But usually a lot of people say to me, it's something along the lines of, oh, you look great. I like your hat. I like your coat. I like the way that you're, I mean, there's a particular picture here. Where's the chap with his dog? Yeah, he looks great. In his furry coat and his furry dog as well. Yeah. That might be an easy one. But you've got a real eclectic mix of people here, all genders, all ages.
It was really simple, actually. I just went up to them, and as you said, you dropped them a little compliment. Be it, oh, I love your hat, or oh, your child's incredibly cute. I'd love to get a photo of you guys together. There wasn't really much more to it than other than giving them a little bit of a compliment, reassuring them what the photo would be used for, and afterwards, I said, I will show you the photos so that you can see it before it goes anywhere else. So, giving them those three kind of bits of, I guess, a bit of confidence for them really helped for them to agree to do it.
And give me a few tips on posing, what you say.
So I wasn't very, very good at the time, but I knew that I would often ask them to, I didn't want their hands hanging by the side. So I'd always have their hands kind of either placed on their hip or holding their hands together. And then I remember I would ask them not to, although a lot of them I would ask them not to look directly at the camera. I'd almost say, have your body facing the camera, but your face should be slightly turned to a different direction with your eyes looking towards me.
Right. A lot of the time, though, they're looking at you, aren't they? Actually.
Yeah. But what I did get out of, I think, nearly all of them was a lovely smile, which I was, a lot of the time it's just a lot of grimaces and not expressive expressions on their face. But this time people were incredibly, like I said, really happy to take part, which was really nice.
Would you say this is perhaps going to, or has this been responsible for your desire to do more work with portraits such as fashion, as you mentioned when we chatted a couple of weeks ago? Is this like the conduit for it?
Definitely. The fact that, people are so up for it, which, was the most surprising thing. I thought most people would say no. And then the fact that the photos that I put together, nearly everything's out of my control.
Yeah.
So I want to start taking back that control bit by bit, be it, the lighting, be it the people to begin with. So I want to go out, look for interesting people and start shooting them and collecting a body of work that reflects that.
Go on then, rejection. You said 90% of people said yes, no probs at all. You obviously have a very approachable demeanour about you. How did you handle the rejection?
No problem whatsoever. No. I mean, I'm quite empathetic. So I know when I'm not in the mood for a photo, or I don't want to be behind the camera, or when someone takes a photo of me and I'm like, please, whatever you do not post it on social media. So it was a very empathetic approach. Yeah. So if people didn't want to be on the photo, that's totally fine. I would try and work my magic. I'd, still try to persuade them, show them other portraits that we had made. But as far as rejection is concerned, I'm not trying to force anyone to be behind the lens.
Did it make it harder that there was a writer with you? Because if you're on your own approaching people, that's one level. When there's two of you, that introduces a second dynamic that I would imagine is a bit more tricky.
I found it easier with the second person, but we had to, it took, I think there was 3 attempts to find that right second person, because on the first day we went out, the first person really didn't like approaching people. So I was approaching everyone, and their part of the interview to approach people, they just weren't enjoying it. No. So then we got someone else to do it. Again, I was like, by this time I was quite used to approaching people, so I was happy to do it, but they didn't like the fact that they had to stand around all day waiting for people to come to the lockers to do it. And I was like, well, this is for me, it's like street photography anyway. I don't know when a photo is going to come my way, and the fact that I've got a very distinct brief here, I was happy to do it. But finally, the third person I met was super bubbly, super lively. So when we both approached together, it just made the whole kind of interaction so much easier. So it really depended on who I was with. And, in the last instance, we finally got that gel together where we were working well as a team. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, this story, isn't it? The last one was just right. Exactly. They're a super set of photographs. And are we likely to see more of this kind of work on your general Instagram grid? Or would that defy logic when it comes to brand? Because you're not known for this. No, it's something I certainly want to expand the brand to embrace. I want brands to understand that I can go out and I can take portraits of people and I can take them very well. And I can do it during the daytime, as we notice in this whole range. Not locked away for the night. Exactly. So, I just think it's something that I'm excited about. Every time I've done some fashion stuff and worked with models, that was, I really enjoyed that, because the control I had, the time I had to actually make a photo was like tenfold compared to that 1/25th of a second or 1/250th of a second to make a street photo. So I think for me, it's bringing back that control and seeing how I can achieve something similar, but with my kind of authentic stamp on it.
And my thanks to Mr. Whisper for joining us on this special today. I am hoping to actually go on a photo walk with him at some stage, with Bal in London. We'll do an after dark one. I tell you what, I haven't run this past him yet. You know me. I have my ideas as I walk along with you. I said, would that be a nice idea? And you often say to me, yeah, it's not a bad idea, Neil, actually. I think you should do that, before either of us have ever got in touch with the people that we're talking about. But I do think it might be a nice idea to go up to the smoke, as my mum used to say, which I never quite understood, actually, because we lived above London in Hertfordshire. And so up to the smoke really should have been, I don't know, up north, not down south to London. It's just an expression, Neil. I know, but all the same. So, yeah, I'll go up to the smoke in winter. What about that? Because I know Bal said, whether he said it on the show or not, I don't know. We definitely had a chat about it. He said that he much prefers winter for photographing in. Because, I suppose that helps with the rain shots. There's fantastic rain shots that he gets. It's more likely in winter, but also it gets darker earlier, which means he can go to work at sort of 4 or 5 o'clock instead of 10 p.m. at night. So, that would be a nice idea. A street walk, a street edition, photo walking with Bal, Mr. Whisper, in London after dark. Good idea? Put your hands up. Good, that's decided. We just need to break it to Bal now. I've not been making a lot of pictures actually on this photo walk. I have been making the occasional sketchbook, but let's do another one now while I think about it. Into this clearing of light. Loose rain today, not very heavy, nothing horrible, but certainly it means I keep having to make sure my camera's not getting wet. Right, F4. 2400 shutter speed. Here we go. As I walk into the clearing, you'll see it ahead of me. You'll think, how's Neil going to get through that? That's not a path. It's just become overgrown. You're right. Here we go. A sketchbook, which I'll put on the show page today. Right, a letter from Fred Ash. First-time writer to the show. There's always a skip in my photographic heart when we have a first-time writer, because it feels to me like you feel safe to send in your thoughts. So from Fred, who has some thoughts about making street portraits. Hi, Neil. Making street portraits is a joyful project that will never disappoint, though there's no one way to approach it. Do keep your camera in your hand with an intention to see portrait opportunities. Allow yourself to have your own transient feelings as you walk, or don't walk, just sit, see, and wait. Don't hide behind your viewfinder. Look into people's eyes and feel. Dare to ask any person to make their portrait and then ask if they'd like to have it emailed to them or see it on Instagram or not. I like this. The do's, the don'ts, the or nots. Do dare to make a person's portrait without asking them and then engage with them in perhaps a recorded conversation afterwards or not. Take a theme to the street and make portraits until you get what you want. Or go to the street with nothing in your mind. With open eyes and an open heart, and just enjoy. Happy summer from Street Fred, Street_Fred on Instagram, which of course I will link to today. Thanks, Fred. And some cracking pictures on that grid. And I think your approach, the do go and do this or don't. I quite like that. There are no rules, are there? And that's one thing we're briskly finding out within this special. And let's have a second part of my conversation with Paul Hutson. Now, this is a complete spoiler alert, for which I'll make no apologies, because I often do it. But perhaps I can highlight something Paul's about to say, which I think will mean more when he actually says it. But you'll be sort of looking out for it, so to speak. He mentions that people in life, and perhaps this is sort of more modern construct of the time, certainly a reference of the times we live in, that people in life, particularly those of more mature years, that people in life, they don't always get listened to in a concentrated way where they may share their stories. So you'll often be pleasantly surprised how much somebody will share conversationally with you when you consciously lend your ears, as it were. That's effectively what Paul says, and I think he's absolutely right. Striking up a rapport with somebody, listening, spending time with them. I nearly said investing, but that's far too much of a business transaction. Investing time with people. I think I do say it in the conversations today. Treat that with a small eye when I do say it, because I don't mean that as in a transaction. Well, if I do that, you'll get this. No, that's not what this is about. Because sometimes at the end of a conversation, as I found actually, when I'm trying to make street portraits, I'll have a conversation with somebody and I will say, can I make your picture? Can I take your portrait? And they'll say, do you mind if we don't? And that's fine. And it certainly doesn't mean that your time has been wasted having a conversation with somebody. And I truly believe that. But I think the conversation, taking time to sit down and listen to somebody who'll share stories that they don't always get asked for by other people, or people perhaps aren't as patient as you will be when you're listening. I think that's a very important component of Paul's street photography work. I really do. So here's part 2 of my conversation with Paul Hutson. Right, what's next?
Next, we have Adrian.
So let me explain Adrian. He is an eccentric character, a sharp red beret. Oh, no, it's not a beret, actually, is it? No, that's
it's a cap.
It's a cap, a sharp red cap, a grey beard that has very long twizzles coming down from it. He's wearing a tweed jacket. I mean, he's very countrified, very gentrified kind of chap with a strange man bag.
Yes. Now, this is an interesting one and completely different from the stories I've given so far. So about 3 or 4 years ago, I was in a tea shop, and he was in the tea shop, and it was in Malton. Right. And a friend of mine, he beat me to it, basically. He went up and engaged him in conversation and ended up making his portrait. And the chap was obviously happy for him to do that. I didn't catch his name. I don't think my friend did, but he went away with his photographs, and the guy left the tea shop and went off down the street. And I was in Hull about a couple of months ago. Unusually for me to do street photography with somebody else. I often do it on my own or in the encounter situation and with family and friends. But this was a definite intentional street photography day, and I was with Sean Tucker. And I saw this guy walking down the street, and I thought, I recognise him. Where do I recognise him from? And I said to Sean, who was experimenting with that lens that he's got, a Mitakon f1.4 on a Fuji GFX 50R that gives a Pentax 6.7 look. There you go. I'll be making your nose bleed at this rate.
Yeah.
I nudged Sean, and Sean went and made some photographs of him, sat down with people around, and used that Mitakon lens to its full effect by its ability to have a very, very shallow depth of field. And when he'd finished, I thought, I'm just going to ask this guy. So I asked him his name. He told me it was Adrian. And I was just about to say, I recognise you. And he said, you photographed me before. So I said, well, I haven't, but I think my friend did in Malton. And he said, oh, yes, that's right. A chap called Walter. And that was the name of my friend. So this guy's got a really good memory.
Yeah.
And then I just said, well, can I take one now? And of course he agreed. And I just chose the shutters of this closed shop just to grab a few quick shots of him. He didn't really have a great deal of conversation. I got the impression he just liked to show off the way he looked and have people photograph him. And then he went off, and we later saw him.
We don't know his story then, really.
I don't really know much of his story behind him. I'd like to know more, but he rode off on a bike. We saw him about 5 minutes later on a sit-up and beg bike cycling down the street. So I assume he lives in Hull. So next time I go, because Hull's a great place for doing street photography, really good, I'm going to see if I can bump into him again and maybe talk to him for longer, just to find out, why he dresses like that, what's his background, what's his interests.
Now, these are all environmental portraits in so far as, with the exception of the goth that you photographed, they are where they are as they walk past you. And this chap is an example of that. Is there a rule in this with regard to your encounters that you want to photograph them where you met them, or do you move people around much?
A little bit, of course, right. Yeah. I want to try and make the photograph as aesthetically pleasing as possible. I often these days like to add more depth and maybe even layer the photograph so there are other things going on in the background. It's called an encounter because that's exactly what it is. I can't control the light, I can't control the background to a great extent because I'm just encountering these people in the street or the countryside or the riverside. They were just where they were when I first saw them.
Right, this encounter. Well, I see National Lifeboat written on the boat behind him, but that doesn't necessarily look like a very modern lifeboat, or is it? I don't know.
It isn't. It's the Alfred Corrie lifeboat from many decades ago that operated out of Southwold. And down on the riverfront, at the entrance to Southwold Harbour, on the River Blythe, there is an old lifeboat station, which is now a lifeboat museum.
I know it. Yeah, I know it.
And I was there with the family, and I was with my wife and my sister-in-law and my son. And we thought, a lifeboat museum, that'll be interesting. Let's pop in there. So we walked in and everyone started looking at the exhibitions. And this chap was at the front and just came up and said, can I help you? And I explained we were on holiday and blah, blah, blah. And we got talking. And again, I think because I expressed interest in him and how did he come to be a volunteer at the museum, he then opened up. And in which time, over the course of half an hour, 3/4 an hour or more, my family disappeared and I lost them.
This is a regular occurrence in your life, isn't it?
Him and I, Fred and I, carried on talking.
Fred, right?
Fred revealed a whole string of jobs that he'd done in the past. From memory, he'd been a bus driver, he'd worked in insurance, and then he'd been a coach driver. And then he'd gone abroad for a while, and then he'd come back. And within this period of time, which when my family disappeared, he basically told me his whole career and all the variety of really interesting but rewarding jobs that he'd undertaken in his life, ending up with him retiring and being a volunteer at the Southwold LNI Museum. So, amazing. I really enjoyed talking with him, learnt a lot. And it just showed you, some people like myself go into a career job and stay with one company and one kind of work for the whole of their lives. And other people just do a whole a plethora of interesting different jobs.
Why did you choose to photograph him where he is?
Because I feel it fitted the relevance of him being a lifeboat volunteer. There was a theme in there because he had lived on the coast quite a bit of the sea and boats, so it kind of fitted with, I felt, his personality. And I liked, and aesthetically, I liked the colours. I liked the rope hanging down. I liked the red jacket versus the light blue of the boat, and the light coming from the door. As you've seen. In fact, I think every photograph we've looked at it's all in natural light. So I predominantly shoot natural light.
And you never use flash, do you, for these?
Very rarely. I have used flash, but it's like 1 in 100.
Yeah. Conversational tips. I know we've been talking about how you start talking or get chatting to people, but any tips about that? It's not something they teach at school.
It isn't, and it took me a long time to learn, and I have to give my wife quite a bit of credit, actually, and my best pal, Mike. Both of them are really good listeners, and I've watched their technique when we've been with other people. So they listen actively, so they'll interject in the conversation with, yes, or, so it gives a flow to the conversation, and the person that's talking is conscious that they're actively listening and that they're engaged and that they're interested in what they're saying. And it's pretty simple and straightforward, but do that. And remember, obviously concentrate on what they're saying, remember what they're saying, and occasionally feedback, but when you said you went to there, didn't you find that quite scary or whatever? And then that reaffirms with them, not only are you listening, but you're remembering what they've said, and you're trying to develop what they probably wanted to develop anyway. So I find all those techniques of nodding and eye contact, a little, as you can tell, a little bit of gesticulation as well, all helps to convince them you're interested in them, you're giving them your full attention, your time, and the fact then that you want to make a photograph of them means you like them, you think they're interesting, and that's it basically.
Having watched you at work, I noticed something that you do, which I was told about many years ago when I was taught to go onto the streets and do vox pops, which I found intensely frightening. You do what I'm sure a producer said to me once, you talk in question marks. And I think that's really important because so many people these days don't put enough of those in their conversation.
No, you're right. And I think it's really important to do that. I think it's really important to make sure your questions are nice and open, that give them some low-hanging fruit to pick and, eat and enjoy and consume in terms of the attention you're giving them and what they can tell you.
Yeah.
And, probably in life, sadly, a lot of people that live their lives and have these interesting stories to tell rarely get the opportunity to tell them because either their partner, their wife, their husband, relatives, their friends, when they go for a drink, maybe aren't that interested.
Yeah.
So I think with some people, it's so unusual for somebody to, especially a stranger, to get talking to them and show such interest that they're really pleased.
Yeah, do you know the other thing I've observed of your work and looking through your catalogues is that you don't seem to favour a particular demographic. It's nothing to do with gender. Maybe you talk to more mature people. If I were to look at numbers, perhaps you do, because they, of course, have these life stories you're referring to. But I don't see that as a conscious decision.
It isn't, although I am these days really, really conscious of that aspect to my work. So, for example, I was mentioning to you before we started this chat, Neil, that today I uploaded to Blurb what will be a prototype for my new book.
Very exciting.
And one of the exercises I went through was, because I'd broken it down into 3 sections, it's a portraits book from the 1980s, and it's all black and white, and it is proper full-blown portraits. And I was thinking, okay, how many men have I got in here? How many women have I got in here? How many young people versus old? Have I got any children? Have I got people of different ethnicity? And one of the issues of living in the north and in North Yorkshire is that the range of ethnicities is quite narrow. 90%, 95% of the people I engage with on a day-to-day basis are white and usually male and old, like me. And what I am actively seeking now, while I'm doing these encounters and actually while I'm doing my portraits, is to meet people with different gender orientations, sexual orientations, and different ethnicities, to try and build a little bit more variety, rather than photographs of this old white male from the north of England in his narrow community.
And my thanks to Paul Hutson for his time talking with us this week on this special. I've been presenting this podcast for some time now. We can count in years and years now. So I feel very honoured and blessed to include many of those you hear on the show as friends. And Paul is certainly that. If you ever have a chance to spend an afternoon with Paul photographing, honestly, you'll be blessed too with a real experience in understanding how to engage, or how he engages with people, because he is simply on his A game when it comes to genuine curiosity in humans. He really is. Right, the assignment for this month. You have one more week to join in with this one. It's from John Angerson, who set the one-word assignment for this month, which is destroy. From John, destroy could be interpreted as a positive challenge, as much a negative one. As with most things in photography, turning things upside down can often yield unexpected results. So capture an image that conveys the concept destroy. This could be a haunting photograph of a decaying building that once stood proudly, now reduced to rubble and ruin. It could be a shattered object, capturing the moment of its destruction, or the fragments left behind. Nature scenes, he says, can also tell a story of destroy or destruction. I extended it's a bit naughty really, because it's one word, and I said, all right, you can have destruction as well. But good luck, you've got one more week. Send your pictures in that we can all learn from to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. Genuine privilege to receive your pictures. And I do think, I mean this, I do think that the pictures you've been sending in for the assignments, they are they're lessons in themselves. They really are. So thank you very much for sending those in. If you can optimize them to 2,500 pixels wide, that's fantastic. If you can't, just send me the full res and I will do the heavy lifting for you and optimize it for the show page. And if you can remember not to put watermarks on them, that would be great. I will, of course, link to anything that you would like me to link to, including Flickr and Instagram, websites, and so on and so forth. So, my final guest in this special this week that we've had about photographing strangers, well, I'm turning to Valérie Jardin, our street mentor now for over a year. Valérie talks most often about candid captures, doesn't she? And so I wanted to take that tack with her, as there are, of course, many ways to photograph strangers. But since this is an episode that has the word encounters in it, a theme really set by Paul Hutson, this chat highlights what can happen when your candid people photography turns into an encounter that in turn becomes a portrait of a stranger. So here's my conversation with Valérie Jardin. Valérie, portraits within the context of what we're talking about today don't have to be those that are set up. They can be candid, or they can be a sort of a hybrid. Now, I think you're going to go down the route of the hybrid in some respects.
Yes, and my approach is really candid, and people don't know that they're being photographed, or at least at the moment I clicked the shutter, they did not know they were being photographed, even if I was just a few inches away. Whether they realized it after or not, that's okay, but the moment has to be candid the way I see it. And so that's really an important part. But occasionally you'll start a candid shot and then it develops into more of a story with a visual narrative where you actually have an interaction with people. And that's a lot of fun. And I've actually made some good friends that way by chance, or just walking into a shop because it looked interesting. And I said, hey, do you mind if I take a few pictures? And then it becomes an impromptu photo shoot.
It becomes an encounter then, doesn't it?
Exactly.
It moves from the candid form to the encounter. And I think the barbershop is a great place to start. And there's a reason for this as well, because I'm visiting America again. I noticed that you put your out for the week. I won't take it personally. But one of the things I wanted to do where I went last time was I wanted to go to a proper American barber's shop. I loved it. And I went into the barbershop and I meekly said, can I take some pictures? and they said, of course you can. And I spent half an hour in there photographing. What a fantastic place to make pictures. Tell me about the one you found and how you did it and what you said.
Yeah, so I just I just walked in and said, hey, this is such a cool place. I would love to photograph the space and you guys in it. But when I walked in that day, the three barbers had three customers, bikers. Yeah. They had their motors, their Harleys out front. And I'm like, okay, it's a lot to ask. First of all, of three barbers, had there been just one, it's easy to get, oh yeah, no problem. But three would have had to agree. And then I have three customers who it only took one to say, no, I don't want to be photographed. You have mirrors everywhere, so it's like, then it becomes a little more of a juggling act. Yeah. No, all three guys were having a great time and they said, sure, come on in. And so I started shooting. So most of the shots are candid, but then I started interacting with some of the guys and then getting a little closer and getting more of a portrait. So yes, one can lead to another and it makes for a really fun story at that point.
What sort of stuff do you talk? I know this sounds perhaps a bit of a simplistic question, but I think it's important. What sort of stuff do you talk about?
Oh, anything. I mean, the one thing would be to talk about like the game or something, but I don't watch American football baseball or basketball.
I'm not going to be able, I wouldn't be able to do that either.
So I like, but in a barbershop, that would probably be the one topic of conversation.
Right.
So I can't. And if I start talking about soccer, they would probably be completely lost. So you just find like, hey, I saw your bikes outside. So what do you ride? Are you going to the Sturgis rally? I mean, you just try to find things that are local, and then they start a conversation, and one thing leads to another. Yeah, it's pretty easy. I'll ask about, this place is so amazing because it has things all over the walls.
Look
it's
at
also
it.
very difficult to shoot.
Amazing.
So, then you ask about the story of this place and things like that. Again, those three guys were, and they didn't know each other, although they looked like they could have been together. And then I had fun, the legs under the striped robes or whatever they put on them and things. I thought that was kind of funny, and finding different angles. So, and I usually don't spend more than 10, 15 minutes when I do one of those visual narratives. I think it becomes then an exercise, and it's actually an exercise I recommend to my students to do, is to find, doesn't matter what it is, tell the story of the local dog walker or whatever, and use your street photography skills. Then at one point you'll get a silhouette. You can add some motion by slowing your shutter speed. You can really use all your skills as a street photographer, getting into some details, the hand holding the leash, whatever it is. Do those visual narrative exercises because they will really help your street photography skills, and then you use those skills to make a compelling story. So it works both ways. But no matter what you do, you learn so much, and it's fun. There is another instance. We were looking at the woman fishing clam on the beach, and it started out as a candid shot of the silhouette as I was getting close and quietly getting really close to her. I went down close to the ground to isolate her in the sky to get a silhouette shot of her. And then we started talking. And then I played around with, getting some close-ups and isolating the little rake and a shallow depth of field and everything. And then her walking away. So, but I've actually met her other times too. So it's the beach where I spent so many weeks every year. So we ended up parting ways by exchanging our Instagram. So you never know what it could lead to. You can make friends that way, and I have made a lot of friends that way.
Detail seems to be an important thing within your narratives, as you've suggested. The clam lady, and we will put some pictures on the show page. So there's pictures of the bucket with the clams in them. As you say, there's the trowel, the fork going into the water. Then you pull away and there's a wide shot of her walking away with a day's catch. That's what you mean by a narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, so you kind of have that same recipe you do to tell a story in your travel photography, for example. You have the white shot, which is usually not the most interesting shot. And then you have some medium shots. But the ones that are the most important are those vignette shots, those detail shots that will really tie the story together.
One thing that's becoming evident through the discussions in today's program is that people, far from being, what do you want the picture for? I'm not quite sure. And closing up. I know some people will, but there's many people that are quite, well, yes, and actually very pleased to talk about what they do.
That's about, I would say, 99.9% of the case. People are really happy to interact, to show you what they're doing, and to share with you, and then to be featured. They love it. I mean, they feel special, and everybody likes to feel special. And so I've never had a bad experience, never.
Did you say it's about? I think you said it's about 10 minutes. Is that a regular? I'm going to use the budget word, but is that the regular budget
10,
time?
20 minutes.
10, 20 minutes.
Yeah,
okay.
of shooting at most, because a lot of the time is also talking, interacting, and although I do both because I use live view, so I always have that connection with the subject, and I think that's quite important.
You never take your eyes away from them, then.
Exactly. So I'm having an interaction, and the same, when I'm working with my centenarians. The same thing. I'm not hiding behind the camera. I'm having a conversation as I'm working. So you're doing that dance, the street photographer dance, where you're just now. Positioning yourself, finding the best possible angle to remove distracting elements from behind the subject and so forth, finding the best possible angle while you're talking and shooting. I mean, it's kind of a juggling act, but the more you do that, the more it becomes normal, and it all becomes the way you see? If you had to think of everything that, rule of thirds and, I better make sure there is nothing behind the subject that's sticking out of their ears and things like that. Well, you would never take a picture.
I love the pictures of Nolwenn and Benjamin, finally. I would imagine immediately. I suppose looking through the eyes of Valerie, which should be a book, or at least a song, there seems to be a story everywhere. And it appears this is another one of those just wanders along a beach, finding people and then becoming a story. Tell me about the two of them.
Yeah, I was riding my bike and I saw those two guys in the evening light on their skimboards, and they looked like they knew what they were doing. So it was low tide. You do skimboarding usually at low tide because you only need a little bit of water. And so I put the bike down and I ran to the water, which was quite a long ways, hoping that they would still be skimboarding. So I grabbed most of the shots candidly. They were doing their thing. And then as they were almost done, I said, hey, I got some good pictures of you guys. Love to share with you. We exchange Instagram. That's usually how I exchange now. I don't carry business cards with me anymore, but we just exchanged Instagram. They send me a message, say, hey, you photographed us last night. And then I send them the pictures and I tag them if we connect on Instagram.
That sounds like a building relationships exercise as much as anything, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm a social person. And street photography is such a lonely pursuit, right? Because you don't interact with people. You're kind of invisible. So for me, those are the times where I can actually interact with people. But it already starts in a candid way.
Let me ask a question that I've asked everybody today. How do you deal with rejection if it comes along? If somebody says, no thanks.
Oh, I've said that to someone, so I hope they deal with it. The one time somebody asked to do a street portrait of me, I said, oh, no, thank you.
Oh, Valerie.
And so I totally get it. And that's fine. I said, oh, well, hey, thanks for your time.
And my thanks to Valérie Jardin for guesting on this special about photographing strangers, encounters. And I'll link to Valerie's work, of course, on the show page. And thank you to all our guests today and the letters that we've had in as well. Thank you to Mr. Whisper. Thank you to Gabrielle Motola, to Valérie Jardin, of course, as you heard there, and Paul Hutson for your wonderful stories when you've been photographing people and for sharing those pictures on the show page with us today as well. Now, I'm going to need a bit of your help for the next special, which won't be... Now, we do have a special next week, which is me in the darkroom. I am taking a walk, if you can include the mile and a half we walk between Finsbury Park Station in North London and Mike's amazing darkroom. But apart from that, I won't be walking along a trail, no. But the next special, we're sort of dipping in and out of vacations in the Northern Hem anyway. So I thought, well, we'll do the next special in a few months' time, because in September the special will at the end of the month will definitely be the photographic retreat from Scotland. Of course it will be. Looking forward to that. So I thought the special on confidence, which will include the conversations I'm sure about imposter syndrome, will be at the end of October. The end of October, Neil? That's like 3 years away. No, it's not. This year seems to have zoomed by. It really only seems yesterday that I was right in the middle of an African dance, the Kankaran, as well in West Africa, in the Gambia. So it really has zimmed and zoomed by this particular year. So yeah, get your thoughts in now, because it won't be long before we do that episode on confidence. Tell me what you feel when it comes to confidence, how you found confidence. I suppose street portraiture in some respects will be a part of that conversation, I have no doubt, but also imposter syndrome, because it's a running theme of many letters that I receive in on this show. So your thoughts about imposter syndrome and all the conversations you can have in between when it comes to confidence, self-confidence and so on. Send your thoughts to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. It's a wide open subject, so get your thinking caps on for that one. Right, that's it for today. We need a play-out song, so you can think about what's been said on today's programme ahead of a PS. And I've gone for a song by Israel Wasserman, who has this wonderful Dylan-esque kind of style. Not quite as raw, admittedly, but wonderful all the same. I've really only recently become appreciative of Dylan. What, Neil? I know. It's taken a little while, but I know that's going to raise the eyebrows of those who are big, fond fans of Dylan, but when I heard this song from an artist you may not have heard from or of, I thought, ooh, I must share this, because A, it is loosely and a little tenuously connected with the street, insofar as that's in the title. It's been a running sub-theme of today's show, of course. And B, it has this wonderful, raspy, dreamlike quality, which is perfect as a play-out song. And it's called simply Streets.
The streets of heaven, where silences go. You can hear the angel whisper a song, and doves are rising to the unknown. Yes, this is my daydream when you're home. And inside this home, the water flows, takes me away to the gates of hope, and the shadow rises, charging toward the light. This is the way I see you tonight, standing close to your fire, breathing in everything I ever desired, everything I ever wanted, all I ever needed, everything I am dreaming is you. And slowly I fell into your arms, like a stone in space, floating down shine. Days of anger fading into the white. You see, with you, babe, I never lose the fight. Standing close to your fire, breathing in everything I ever desired, everything I ever wanted, all I ever needed, everything I am dreaming is you. Walls of fear are breaking down. At last I see the road I've followed, everything I ever wanted, everything I ever needed. Is you.
That's Isra Wasserman and Streets. Wonderful. I'm not going to read it today, perhaps not even next week. I'll do it in a few weeks' time. But I've had a wonderful, you know who you are, I've had a wonderful letter from someone who put together the playlist of this show on Spotify. There's a few extra ones in there alongside the songs that we've played, but it was fantastic and I've been listening to it since in the car, so I must share that with you. I will do that. Note to self, make sure you do. I was intending to. I know you were. Just a few closing thoughts before the PS. My sincere thanks to you if you are or you're about to become an extra miler. We'll keep building this. I know I say this every week, but I really mean it. We'll keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic and walking world together. A safe place to share our thoughts about this thing that we love, photographing and walking. My thanks sincerely to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members. Write a postscript for the show. It has to be about encounters, of course. And I think I found one that perfectly encapsulates the joy, the absolute joy of meeting people. It's the second Dostoevsky quote this year. Oh my goodness, Neil, you're going highbrow on us. It's from Crime and Punishment, don't you know? But I think it's perfect. I think this encapsulates what we've been discussing today on the show, and it's this. We sometimes encounter people, even perfect strangers, who begin to interest us at first sight, somehow, suddenly, all at once, before a word has even been spoken.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.